So, you want a 3D printer, you want to be a maker, you want to spend countless amounts of money on filament, or maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you just want to enter the hobby. Where do you start? My name is Bubson, and today I'm going to show you just what you need to get started in the 3D printing hobby. So step number one is, well, you need the printer to begin with. Which one should you choose? There are countless amounts of options, like Core XY, there are bed slingers, there's like these enclosed ones, there's open frame ones, there's one with multicolor units, there's one without them. What do you do? Well, in my humble opinion, it doesn't really matter. Just get one that has generally favorable reviews and prints fine. If you want multicolor, get one with multicolor. If you don't care, then just get one in general. If you don't want to inhale all the fumes, then get an enclosed one that has filtration. But if you don't really care, an open frame one is fine. But Bubson, there's ones called bed slingers, there's one called Core XY, there's Core XZ. What do those even mean, and how do I pick one? Now this is kind of oversimplified, but the way a Core XY machine works is it has two motors attached to a bunch of belts, and it basically moves the tool head, that's the part that spits the filament out after consuming it. It moves it along the X and Y axis, and then the Z axis is the bed that moves up and down. Now I don't have a bed slinger, or at least not out, but a bed slinger works by instead attaching the Y axis to the bed. So the bed moves back and forth while the tool head moves left and right, and then the Z axis is attached to the... I'll put a picture of one and it'll make sense. Then there's ones like Core XZ, which Creality uses, and it's kind of pointless. Generally, picking between a bed slinger and a Core XY machine is fine. If you don't want to maintain it as much, bed slinger is probably better. But if you want more precision and more speed, while not taking up as much space because the bed slinger has to move back and forth, Core XY doesn't have to do that, then you'd want to choose a Core XY machine. So now that you picked your printer, you gotta pick something to put inside it so you can make your goofy little plastic objects that do things. Generally, as a beginner, you're going to be looking at three different types of filament. You're going to be looking at PLA, PETG or PETG, however you want to pronounce it, and TPU. Now there are some big nerds that are going to get mad at me for recommending TPU as a beginner, but it's fine. I'll get into it in a second. But when you're just barely getting started, choose PLA. It is super easy to print with, has decent mechanical properties, and can generally make pretty much anything. But PLA does not like the sun, it doesn't like weather in general, it doesn't like getting hot, and it's just not the best application for things that are doing work. Now, if you want something with more thermal resistance, you're going to want to pick PETG or PETG. It has a higher temperature resistance, it has better UV resistance, it's weather resistant, and it's pretty much the same price as PLA nowadays, and is about as easy to print. Now, if you want to get the bendy parts like phone cases, you're going to want to choose TPU. Now, TPU isn't a very beginner-friendly material, so don't start tinkering with it until you've gotten the basics down. But it makes flexible parts, it's easy enough to print, and it's a good thing to have around because, trust me, when you need it, you're going to be glad you have a spool of it. Now, there are like subsets of different filaments, like for PLA, there's a ton of these cool-looking ones like PLA Sparkle, that's got little shiny bits in it. There's Silk PLA, which is like comically shiny. There's PLA Pro, which is just more rigid. There's a lot of stuff, but just choose the basic stuff to start with and then start looking into all the other ones. Now, the third and final step, and arguably probably the most important, is having a good set of tools to work with for your prints. First, make sure you have flush cutters. Most printers come with them, but these are super handy for cutting off filament if you don't have something like an AMS where you can just pull it out, put it in. It's handy for cleaning up your prints, like cleaning up little burrs and brim parts. They're very handy when it comes to working with plastic. Make sure you have them. Those are the most important. Now, the second most important tool is probably a bed scraper. Even if you have a flexible, like spring steel sheet like this one that you can remove and bend and whatever, having a bed scraper is still handy because sometimes there are little thin parts that you can't get off by bending the bed. These just help so you can, get things off the bed. Now, for bed scrapers, you don't even have to buy one. In fact, if you have a metal bed like this, don't, because if you buy a metal scraper, you're just going to scratch the bed. All you really need to do is just print one. Like, this is something I printed like day one when I very first got my 3D printer, and they do the job well. They're very important, they're very handy. Third tool, and it's another consumable, is a glue stick. Now, having liquid glue as well as like a regular like Elmer's glue type stick is very handy because it helps filament stick to your bed better when it's something like PETG that doesn't like to stick to the bed all that much. Now, another tool you're really going to want is a blowtorch. Now, why do I recommend a blowtorch? Well, it's because when you print stuff, sometimes a little bit of filament gets stuck on the nozzle, and when it moves, it makes a little string. If you've ever used a hot glue gun, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just imagine that, but computerized and with a part that you don't want strings on. Now, what happens with a blowtorch is when you use it, it melts the strings into a little bead. This is very helpful for cleaning up strings and for even welding parts together, if you want to, I guess. Now, the fifth and final tool that I'm gonna say that you need for working with print parts is one of these things. Now, this is called a deburring tool, and it's basically a spinny blade on a stick. This is handy for removing something called a brim. It basically just helps you go around the perimeter of the print and remove little bits that you don't want. Now, for the printer itself, usually it comes with everything you need, but make sure that you have some sort of lubricant, some sort of like nozzle declogging tool. They usually come with all the Allen keys and stuff that you need to take it apart. Now, there are a whole other world of things that you could get for your 3D printing hobby, like little screw kits for making stuff, bunch of magnets, you know, other tools like screwdrivers, utility knives. But in general, you shouldn't get them until you need them, or at least you really don't have to get them until you need them. Alright, so to recap, just pick a printer that does what you want it to do. Start by printing PLA, PETG, and maybe TPU, and then just make sure you have all the tools that you need, all the supplies that you need. You'll be a maker in no time. Well, I hope that you found my video helpful. If you want to hear me yell more, subscribe, and happy printing.